why is it that a developer can only spend 1 hour a day writing code? It's that they are in meetings all the time, having interruptions. They are waiting on CI. They're trying to navigate through code bases. We see this reflected in the data. And when we look at AI time savings right now, which is median like 3 hours, 45 minutes per developer per week. And then we look at how much time they could be saving by reducing dev environment toil, by having better documentation, by reducing meetings. AI doesn't even cover a tenth of what they could be saving if the other parts of the developer experience were also increased. So speaking to your kind of deep-seated fear, maybe about like the overpromise of AI, I think one of the ways that AI has been overpromised is that it is a silver bullet that is going to solve so many problems, when in fact, developer experience is still a way bigger lever for almost every company than AI-assisted engineering, at least at this point in time.
This is one of my most important and favorite episodes this year. I'm so excited to let you listen to this. If you are currently using AI or even thinking of using AI in software engineering, you'll want to hear from our guest on this show, Laura Tacho, who's a friend of the show, been on many times. Laura is the CIO of DX. That's the DevX and Dev Productivity Company, where they help organizations measure development team work. And in this episode, we're focusing on her team's work on the gains and losses of using AI in your software lifecycle. My co-host Nirmal is back, adding his experience from what he's seeing on the topic at AWS and their customers. And if you haven't heard Laura before, she's been on this show many times talking about containers and DevOps. But years back, she started focusing on engineering management and improving productivity and measuring outcomes, which happens to be very important when you start introducing a new workflow to everyone's job like AI is doing. Her pivotal work at DX has her focusing exclusively on how professional software teams are actually adopting AI, where the snags and rough spots are, and how your team can properly adopt AI today for maximum productivity benefits. Also, a quick reminder to smash that like button and review the podcast in your player, if that's your chosen way to listen or watch, because that's the way to help this episode cut through the hype and noise out there on the internet around AI adoption so that other engineers might find Laura's breath of fresh air on the subject. It turns out it's all not doom and gloom, and we all are probably still going to have jobs, and AI is not as good as they claim it is. That's a spoiler on there, TLDR, but thanks so much for watching, and let's get to the show. Hey, welcome to the Agentic DevOps podcast. I am Bret. I am here with my co-host today, Nirmal Mehta. Welcome, Nirmal.
Thanks for having me back, Bret. I'm Nirmal Mehta. I'm a principal special solution architect and containers tech lead at AWS. And today, these are my opinions and not of my employer, Amazon Web Services.
I'm glad to have you back. And we're completing the trio today. Laura Tacho is back with us. She's been
super excited
on so many podcast episodes, I can't keep track anymore. Welcome, Laura. I'm glad to have you here.
Hi, Bret. I'm Nirmal. It's so nice to have the trio back reunited. Let's hope the audience can brace themselves for what's about to come.
You're so kind. Can't wait to get into it. We have such interesting topics to dig into.
Laura, you work at DX. Tell us about DX and what you do there.
So I am CTO at DX. DX is a developer intelligence platform. That means we are getting data insights, qualitative, self-reported from developers about developer experience, about velocity, productivity metrics, and helping organizations use that data in order to improve, in order to make and validate their AI strategy, in order to make developer experience better and help engineers get more work done with less friction and less drag across their systems. A very exciting role. I get to look into so many different organizations, Netflix, ADP, Vanguard, Pfizer, you name it. I've had a chance to work with some really exceptional leaders who believe that developer experience is an incredibly important driver, and that is such a nice environment to work in.
So Nirmal and I have got to watch your rise of fame recently around AI, because you have been speaking heavily for months now, if not a year, around productivity, specifically related to AI.
Can you tell me, you recently launched something significant. What was that?
The AI measurement framework.
AI measurement framework. What does that mean?
What does that mean, Bret?
Does it mean the AI is good or bad?
Yeah. Well, we help you find out. One of the things that I enjoy about my job at DX is that we are not affiliated with any AI vendor or any other kind of vendor for a tool in the SDLC. What we try to do is get you the data so that you can interpret it and make decisions on what you should do for your developers. Because of that, we're in a really unique position to guide the industry on measuring the impact of AI, because I have a front row seat to 400 plus companies and how they're using AI, what's worked, what hasn't worked. I have a bunch of longitudinal data. I've been working on developer productivity metrics as my sole focus for 4 or 5 years now. And then before that, I've been in developer tooling for like 15 years, before Docker, before we knew each other. Back in January of last year, we wanted to answer this question of like, how should I measure developer productivity? And that's where the DX Core 4 framework came out. So I worked on that with Abhi Noda, who's the co-founder of DX. We worked with Nicole Forsgren, other researchers, and put together that guidance. Well, it didn't take long before AI really kind of blew everything up. Late 2024, a lot of companies were adopting it, and they were looking and thinking, do we need totally new metrics? Like, how do we measure the impact of AI? How do I know if I'm having a return on investment? How does this all relate to things like DORA metrics of the DX Core 4? We came up with the AI measurement framework, which is really targeted specifically to measure how and where AI is being used. When you use that together with the DX Core 4, you get a comprehensive picture into speed, quality, maintainability, developer experience, business impact, all of those factors that AI is supposed to be helping us with. Maybe you can find out if it is or if it isn't and decide what to do next.
Nirmal and I started this podcast at London, which we were all at London for KubeCon earlier this year, I think in April. And that's when Nirmal and I recorded the first episode of this new podcast. At the time, we were still trying to figure out, I feel like so much has happened since in the last 5 months. At the time, we were still trying to read the tea leaves around how AI is useful or not in the software lifecycle, and where is it most useful? Where should we be putting our energy and attention? And that was really one of the major premises for even starting this thing, was everyone's talking about frontier models and dev tooling that adopts AI, and everything's shiny, everything flashy. And we were really interested in where is it actually useful today? Because you can easily just sit down and be overwhelmed with everything. But since then, you've come out with this framework. You've been talking all over the place, multiple conferences around the truth. And we've started to get some sensational headlines that you talked recently on the Pragmatic Engineer podcast around everything from 30% of Microsoft code is AI to now we see things of despair of there's actually negative productivity in certain teams. And it just feels like it's all over the board.
Right.
Can you distill all that down to what you're seeing and what's fact from fiction?
Let's rewind. There's a couple of things that you said that maybe we can kind of paint the picture of what's reality here. You mentioned one thing I want to dig into a little bit. You're talking about like frontier models and doing everything on the bleeding edge. All of us and our collective gray hair, we were around for containerization. Before the show started, we were talking about how some companies were okay with pressing snooze on Kubernetes. They were okay with pressing snooze on containerization. Maybe they were even okay with pressing snooze on the cloud. And that just doesn't seem to be happening with AI. There's really like a lot of hunger to like adopt it now, get the maximum gain. And, thinking about that and what you said about the frontier models, it very much felt like what we were doing. How long ago was that? 12, 13 years ago with Docker? That very much was on the frontier. And what we found was actually the hardest problems are kind of the most boring problems. It was a lot of lift and shift. It was a lot of replatforming. It was a lot of just like enterprise legacy. That is the majority of what everyday developers are doing. They're not doing frontier work with models. They are trying to navigate and cut through the spaghetti code in their 10, 20 plus year code base, just showing up to work every day, doing the best they can and enjoying the craft and trying to help their company hit their business objectives. When we talk about a lot of this, like what's in the news, there is a lot about the frontier and the bleeding edge. What's really tricky though is there's a big gap between the frontier and the bleeding edge and like the experience of an quote unquote everyday developer and what they do every day, in the same way that we saw that in Kubernetes Docker time. There's quite a gap between those things. So that's one thing. I didn't totally answer your question.
So
it's a good place to start though.
So there's a difference that you're seeing, right? We have that traditional Gartner hype cycle, like early adopters, and then the late majority and the laggards. I think you were mentioning that you've not seen some situation where the laggards and the late majority are actually pursuing this technology aggressively as if they're early adopters without understanding deeply the value proposition. Why is that happening?
I think this comes down to money. There is a lot of sensationalization, sensational headlines about what AI can do and its impact on the marketplace and its impact on sort of like bottom line P&L on the economic situation. And I think that's been a huge driving force for a lot of these companies that previously for any other technology would have been very fine to be in the late adopter or late majority laggard kind of place. But the promise, the financial gain for AI is just so promising because it not only helps them operate in a leaner way, but when their competitors also have access to that technology, they will outpace them. I think that's the real threat when I talk to CTOs and senior exec teams from companies that previously would have been in that late majority is that it's not about cutting headcount. It's not about necessarily cutting costs. It's that their competitors have access to this technology and they're so worried about being outpaced. They want to catch up as fast as they can to not lose footing in the marketplace and their competitiveness, because that's the risk. And that is a huge disadvantage if that would come true.
So that implies that the CTOs and the leaders that you're talking to are in companies that do face real competition, right? If they're representing industries where there's not necessarily that much competitive pressure, then that might not be necessarily true, and they might be able to hold out a little bit longer and truly see if there's an advantage.
Yeah, I think I see competitive pressure on two ways. One is like in the marketplace, right? Like capitalism, but the other place is in the marketplace for talent. And that is also a very big concern for these companies that, they feel like they're behind on AI because they're worried that because they're not adopting these tools, they're no longer an interesting place or rewarding place for their developers to work, and that they're going to have a brain drain, people leaving their company and going to work for places that are adopting these tools, embracing them more. I think the market as it is right now isn't very conducive to that happening, but it's definitely something running in the background of a lot of executives' minds about making it attractive for talent to stay, reducing attrition risk, that kind of competition in the talent marketplace, along with competition in the marketplace for their software, whatever businesses they're selling.
One of the thoughts I've had early that we've discussed earlier was if there's any marketing win for big tech, specifically the AI companies, which is all of big tech now, it's they convinced us all from average dev to CIO or CEO that AI is going to speed up everything and that they need to adopt it everywhere. We talked earlier, where's the precedent? Where's the previous precedent of what we're dealing with right now? I struggled to come up with one because when the cloud started, it was one company. Then Docker came out, it was one company. And there were other ones trying to play around with containers and stuff, but there was this singular focus on a single company. And now we have an entire industry, whether it's CIO Magazine or the Pragmatic Engineer, newsletter, like they're all telling us that these tools are being adopted by everyone else, not us. So we have the feeling of being left out, the feeling of being left behind. And the main reason that everyone believes this is better is because it improves the speed of business. We've all been hypnotized by it. And obviously we have the people that are pessimistic and waiting and all that stuff, but it feels like they are such a minority as opposed to other trends that it does feel like it's this just tsunami of tooling, of solutions, of promises that I just don't think we're really prepared to an industry to like separate the truth from the fiction and the hype from reality. And we're just not really well equipped right now, I feel, for that.
I think you're very level-headed in your approach. You ask a lot of good questions about, wait, but what about XYZ? Where do you put yourself on that skeptic versus advocate? I mean, you can be both, right? This isn't mutually exclusive. Like I'm skeptical about a lot of things because I see the real data. But also like two truths, like we can be hopeful about something that will be there in the future, but also skeptical about the current capabilities. How do you reconcile that? Especially because you're steeped in this every single day.
Great question. And thanks for throwing it back at us. I think one thing that we've learned, all three of us, in our journey adopting like bleeding edge stuff is new technology paradigms, is to have a healthy dose of skepticism, especially around value proposition, around the capabilities of technology, right? Like early containerization was full of sharp edges that have now been dulled tremendously over the last 15 years. But spinning up a container was full of issues back a long time ago. And we all had a healthy dose of skepticism, but we also saw a path to value for folks that were adopting that technology and immediate use cases, right? Like going from spinning up a VM and waiting an hour as your chef scripts go through and install Apache server to in 2 seconds having 20 containers with the same configuration. It's a very direct line from seeing the technology and the value proposition in terms of cost savings or whatever, right? If you want to follow the money. My healthy dose of skepticism with AI right now is that it seems like we're in a perfect storm of other factors that are going on. And there is a lot of pressure there's so much money involved and so much pressure from all sides that a tremendous amount of fog over this technology. On one side, having adopted these tools, I'm privileged enough to have almost unlimited access to a lot of these technologies and enablement from some of the world's best folks, my colleagues that create this stuff every day, that use this stuff every day. It's hard to push back against that feeling of magic when I first started doing some of the code generation with ChatGPT last year, and then moving over to Klein earlier this year and doing some agentic work with Klein and setting up multi-agents to do operational tasks, to do code generation and prototyping. It does provide value, like even helping come up with questions to ask guests on a podcast. There's value there. At the same time, we have the ending of zero interest in the United States economy. We have global economic turmoil, the promise of these tools to improve productivity in not only developer code generation, but all kinds of different avenues. And with a kind of under the breath, like, oh, that also means we don't need as many people. And I'm healthily skeptical of if the technology will actually deliver on like these hyped up premises, like 60% productivity gains. At the same time, I don't know if that matters. I don't know if the leaders at these companies will actually care about whether there's value there versus using it as an excuse to execute against other defensive maneuvers to navigate all these other things happening in the world. I end up very confused, and I really appreciate that in your latest talk at Lead Dev, you have this big slide that said data beats hype. I think it's not only that data beats hype, which I really appreciate and I would love for you to get into, but we have to present that data as fast as possible because the hype seems to be accelerating and decisions are going to be made before the data is even there. And I'm really worried that damage is going to be done. Maybe a year from now, we're like this fever dream of adopting these AI tools didn't come to fruition, but it doesn't really matter because we're all not working anymore, right? Like, does that even great, we have data that shows that this is not doesn't meet all the things, all the hype, but it's kind of too late. I feel like that's where I am. And if I feel that way, I feel like our audience is probably feeling that same way or will be soon.
I think there's already decisions being made based on hype. For example, knowing how much code that's running in production was authored with AI is a very important thing to understand when it comes to your security posture, understanding changes to SRE, understanding how you might need to change or harden your build and test. It's an important thing for businesses to know, how much of their code is actually AI generated code is actually making to production, because there's different decisions that you'll make if it's 0% or if it's 90%. Up until 3 weeks ago, there was no way to know. There was no technical solution, broadly speaking. There were some pockets of technical solution of being able to track acceptance. So a suggestion, like a code suggestion in an IDE, through an accepted suggestion, so that's in your IDE, through human authored edits, committed, open PR, merged PR in production. There's just no way to do that sort of like provenance for code. But still, we see headlines 6 months ago saying, 30% of our code is being written by software. From my position on the inside, I sit in AI data all day long. This is literally, it's all I do. It's all I do. It's all I think about. There is no way to know that reliably. You can do really structured sampling. You can do self-reported data, and self-reported data does get us most of the way there. But that's not what this is coming from. This is coming from snippets or an executive estimating in some cases how much of the code from their teams is being written. Just very sort of unreliable, very lossy, vibe metrics. And so I do really have a lot of empathy for a CEO who does not have a background as a developer and cannot distinguish claims due to lack of subject matter expertise about what is actually authentic and what is technology really capable of versus what it's not. Of course, these CEOs should be seeking out subject matter expertise, and it is the role of the CTO or VPs of engineering data to bring that knowledge into the organization. But I 100% believe there are decisions being made about AI strategy and investment on, we can call them vapor metrics. They're just sort of or vibe metrics. I like that, Nirmal. It's like vibe metrics. It's about gut feel and not about measurement, not out of ill will or malice, but just out of lack of telemetry, because this has been accelerating so fast. Can you imagine having to decide on your budget for Docker spend or cloud spend for the next fiscal year when Docker couldn't even tell you, Docker PS, how many processes were running or what the size of an image was, and you were trying to forecast your image registry costs? That's kind of what this would feel like, which doesn't make sense, right? It's very dangerous. But because of the hype, it's where we find ourselves right now, at least in a lot of pockets. It is getting better. I have to say that in the last couple of months has gotten a lot of better. But
yeah, just one last comment on that. At the end of the day, data will win, right? Data that backs up the value proposition will win. There might be some pain as folks adopt these technologies preemptively to address competitive pressure. Your approach at DX and doing the hard work of collecting data, even if it's anecdotal and not the best quality data at this time, it's still the only way that both leadership and folks that are being asked to adopt these technologies and find those productivity gains or else will be able to really navigate getting something out of these tools. Because at the end of the day, I do, unlike some of these other technologies that have come out in the last 10 years, I do see, in my own adoption, I do see a path to value. I have received productivity gains from using these tools. So there is something there. With respect to the percentage, I think your approach with the AI measurement framework and collecting that data is going to be key to figuring out where the actual value is, and also changing how I think there's another aspect to this from a potential developer or platform engineer perspective. I'm seeing a trend of their leadership telling them they have to use these tools. And there's a lot of folks who have tried these tools maybe once or twice at some point in the past year, didn't work for them, maybe don't really know how to use it properly, or at that time was not the most effective way or effective model. And because things have changed so much, and we've gotten so many more best practices, they're skeptical, why do I have to try using this? I'm being forced to use a tool. And that's never a great position. But data is the way for those folks to push back against the leadership and potentially adopt those tools in a way that will actually be productive for them.
Absolutely right. I think I've seen lots of companies use the measurements that come out of the AI measurement framework, not just to show the ROI to their leadership, but also to bring that back to the developers to show, You might have been like thinking, sensing, feeling, perceiving this about your own productivity, but here's actually what's happened. There has been a 30% lift in pull requests or merge requests for those using AI daily. You're also reporting that code maintainability is not slipping and that you're still having the same amount of effort to review an AI-assisted diff versus one that wasn't AI-assisted. And that can actually be really powerful for companies to have a validation loop and get people interested in maybe giving it another try, because it's not hype. It's data. It's not someone saying, oh, this is going to give you a 10x productivity boost. It's like, well, you probably are going to save a couple hours and it's going to make it a lot more fun and reduce your cognitive load. So why don't you give it a try? Or we have this new use case that helps you modernize this old bit to the new bit with 70% of the way there. You can just do it with AI and then you only have to take care of that last 30%. Doesn't that sound much better than doing it all by hand? Yeah, maybe I'm going to give it a try. Data is important both for leadership, but also it's very important for developers themselves.
In order to get the advantages, you actually need to do more than just add AI to your IDE. It's almost like a spray and pray has been the attitude of the AI hype cycle. As long as you've got AI code generation happening, as long as you just throw AI into your CI, it's somehow going to magically make everything faster. We're now seeing evidence that it's more than that, which is true of anything in tech. I don't know why we stopped believing that for a moment, because it's always been that way. What is some of the stuff that's happened lately?
Yeah, let me show you actually. I can just talk you through some of the metrics. We can look at some of the news stories and then I'll show you what's really going on out there. This is a good juxtaposition of what we're seeing a lot of. Open up LinkedIn. It'll take you 30 seconds to find something like this. So we've got sensational headline. I mean, this one's not even that sensational. It's like pretty grounded. It's only saying 10% more productive at Google. And then talking through their measurement methodology, TLDR on that one, they're measuring time saved per developer. 10% more productive is on the low end. We're seeing other reports saying it's writing 30% of our code or it's saving our developers 20% of time per week. There's so much variability here because there's so much variability in what actually is being counted when we say AI and developers in the same sentence. For some, we're looking at only code gen. For some, we're looking at AI-assisted engineering, which can be anything from refactoring, debugging, production debugging, lots of other things. Atlassian, their State of DevX report, which I'm actually going to talk about, I think this episode will come out after, but I'm doing a live event to talk through their State of DevX report. Atlassian has put AI in Jira, Confluence, all of their productivity suite of project management tools, task management tools. They see a lot of developers saving a lot of time when you add AI to Jira, for example. But that's really different than adding AI to an IDE, And so we have to ask the question, and those of you listening, when you look at a number, ask the question, what's the boundary, what's the start and stop condition for this metric? What are they actually measuring? Who's being measured? Is it a random sample? Is it customers of a particular company? Ask yourself, does that company sell tools with AI? Are they trying to show me favorable results so that I might be interested in buying their tool? There's a lot of questions to ask, data literacy wise. So over here, we've got these headlines about 10% more productive. This graph here that we see is a study from Meter. And what they did was take 16 developers and they kind of followed them around for a period of time. They are working on open source projects and they have a already pretty good, moderate to heavy familiarity with AI tools. They're all professional programmers. And they tagged some tasks as AI allowed and AI not allowed. And so the ones that were AI not allowed, they definitely couldn't use AI on. The ones that were AI allowed, they could use it however they wanted to. And they had them kind of do some pre-estimation of how much time do you think this is going to take you to do this task if you use AI versus if you don't use AI. And they had them do some kind of predictive estimations. Then they observed them actually. Screen recordings, they also did some exit interview style kind of things. What they found was that the tasks the developers used AI were actually 16% slower than the ones they didn't use AI for. So even though their perception of the change in time, if AI allowed, was positive, the actual result was 16% slower. And this is very valid data gathered in a rigorous way. It's hard to find 16 developers and follow them around for 240 tasks. This was a very big footprint.
Yeah.
The thing, though, this is about open source developers. And specifically, they're talking about open source developers who are working on tasks that are a little bit more on the bleeding edge, on the frontier, where code generation was a huge part of the workload that they were trying to use AI for. That is not very similar to, again, that everyday engineer working in the enterprise who is not doing bleeding edge frontier kind of work. And so while the meter study is very interesting and definitely points out we need more research, when we try to generalize this and say, well, using AI for AI-assisted engineering is going to give your developers a 16% slowdown across the board, irrespective of what type of task, irrespective of type of developer, tenure, company, that also oversimplifies to the point of being incorrect as well. And so we're definitely seeing this kind of from both ends. The skeptics using the meter study to say AI is a bunch of BS and you shouldn't use it, to the people on the other side saying, but Google's saving 10% of time. It's just really hard to know. And there's not a lot of literature on it because it's so new and we don't have longitudinal data because it's not been around for very long. We've only been able to study this for 2 years. It's not like we can look back to the 1970s and look at patterns and see how things have changed over decades.
So you just brought up a really interesting thing, which is the digging into that meter study. It was around a specific use case, code gen. What, in your framework and when you were talking to your customers or to your survey respondents, what are the use cases outside of code gen? Because again, is maybe not the majority of what people are doing every day, right?
Yeah,
to begin with.
And I think that's a really important thing. So I'll also be transparent. When we do research, a lot of it, like if you see me post something on LinkedIn, that's most likely aggregated customer data that I have access to. When we publish reports and guides, like the one I'm about to show you, we do seek out external participants as well to not only include people that are customers of DX, because that's very self-selecting in a certain profile of company that really cares about DX developer
I was going to
experience.
say, they're already tip of the spear. I've never been lucky enough to work at a company that had anyone focused exclusively on DX.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated in your work because it makes every job that I've had and every contracting client I've had feel like they're amateurs. When I read the reports and the information that you all put out in Dora and other sort of tip of the spear, what are the elites doing? It always gives me like, what are we even doing? The rest of us are just winging it. We don't have these methodologies. We don't have these pipelines of data that we're pulling out of all of our utilities in order to gather stats to change behavior, which I feel like is a lot of this. It's like, if it's not changing behavior, then is it worth anything? So it's exciting to see some real numbers come out of this, sort of showing us that, this is like any new technology. We have to figure out where it works and where it doesn't. It's not universal. It's not a panacea. So let's jump in.
Yeah. You say that so eloquently, Bret, like if it's not changing behavior, is it even working? What's the point? Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I get up every day, is to like the companies that you work with that don't have this, trying to get them, giving them tools and resources, enablement so that they can have this, because you don't need crazy ETL pipelines to have information like this. You can get so far with self-reported data from a survey that you run in Google Forms. It's remarkable how well those methods work. Even at scale, the overhead does get cumbersome at some point, but you don't need to wait for perfect ETL pipelines. Anyway, we looked at 180 different companies and talked to developers who were saving the most time with AI. I just asked them, like, what are you doing?
Right.
Stack trace analysis and refactoring existing code were the top 2 use cases that were saving the most time. Mid-loop generation, so like code gen, didn't come in until number 3. And then we have test case generation that's also up there. Like those top 4 are kind of the biggest time savers. Actually, I think this is from AWS, Nirmal. We talked about this at KubeCon when we were in London. The average developer at AWS only spends how much time of their week coding? It's double digits, but it's in the low double digits. Like that. That's very consistent with what we see across the industry, that developers are spending about 20-ish to 30% of their time actually coding. A lot of it is planning, doing maintenance work, doing other stuff. So applying AI to other tasks.
So the stat, I did find it. AWS published in December 3rd, 2024, a post that said that Amazon developers spend most of their time on tedious, undifferentiated tasks such as learning code bases, writing and reviewing documentation, testing, managing deployments, troubleshooting issues, or finding and fixing vulnerabilities. And the stat from the article is no longer in that post, but it was developers reporting spending an average of just 1 hour per day. So this was at reInvent 2024 in the keynote by Matt Garman, where he said that they were spending on average 1 hour a day on actual code development.
Absolutely.
Writing lines.
Yeah.
That was talking about what are some of the use cases that can bring the most gain. I want to show you this other thing, which is really, this is like aggregated kind of dummy data. This isn't data from any customer, because I would never do that. But the spirit of this is accurate. And I've actually seen way more pronounced versions of this. But this is looking in DX. So we do quite a lot of visualizations to help you analyze the data in easier ways. But when you look at why is it that a developer can only spend 1 hour a day writing code, it's that they are in meetings all the time, having interruptions. They are waiting on CI. They're trying to navigate through code bases. Nirmal, like literally exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
We see this reflected in the data. And way down here, it's not always this low for every company, but when we look at AI time savings right now, which is median like 3 hours, 45 minutes per developer per week. And then we look at how much time they could be saving by reducing dev environment toil, by having better documentation, by reducing meetings. AI doesn't even cover a tenth of what they could be saving if the other parts of the developer experience were also increased. I think, speaking to your kind of deep-seated fear, maybe about like the overpromise of AI, I think one of the ways that AI has been overpromised is that it is a silver bullet that is going to solve many problems, when in fact, developer experience is still a way bigger lever for almost every company than AI-assisted engineering, at least at this point in time.
That's super interesting. So another way to interpret that data from what I'm looking at is that the traditional DevOps, like the DevOps maturity of the organization, CI/CD, automation, becomes even more, it was already critical for competitive advantage and value in this AI world. To get the value out of these AI adoption, it becomes even more critical. You have to have that automation in place. And that's what I'm seeing here, right? CI wait time, development, deployment lead time. That's just pure CI/CD, right? Automation. So that tooling needs to be in place. So do you think that folks that are working on or are pushing for AI tooling adoption with their developers, a net benefit is that they'll drag themselves into modern DevOps because they need to do that first to create the foundation for getting the value out of adopting these AI tools? Is that a fair way to see that?
That is a really fair way to see that. I posted about this before. Here's a post from Abhi. I think what you're describing, Nirmal, is that like DevX is Agent X. I think there's some subtleties. I think what you're saying is maybe by using AI, these companies can drag themselves into the future, which is great, because the reality is that a lot of what will benefit agentic models, agentic workflows, good documentation, organized code, fast feedback loops, clear project requirements, those are things that also benefit people. And it's too bad that a lot of companies are only willing to invest in those things for a robot and not for the people that were there before. But our opportunity now is that wallets are open and the end result is the same. And so if the robot and pleasing the robot is what's going to get companies to spend money on these things that are existential and critical and important, then you know what? I'm fine with that. Let's keep the wallets open and let's keep moving into the future.
The reason is less important than the outcome.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, we weren't all pitching better documentation as a business productivity boost. That's never how I positioned it or any other developer I've worked with. The fact, again, like we're going back to this, the hype cycle is promising AI will make business faster. It makes us write code faster, supposedly. Therefore, business goals will be met faster. And I mean, this podcast, we actually like to think of this podcast as focusing on AI after the commit, where so many other podcasts are focused on before the commit. That's why we don't talk about which model we're using. And if we do talk about dev tooling, we're usually just talking about it because we're all into it. It's fun, not because it's the focus of an episode. But we've had other guests on this show and Nirmal and I's other show, DevOps and Docker Talk, we've had multiple shows now over the last 4 months talking about the idea that AI is going to improve the standardization and expectations of teams when it comes to the rigor of everything from documentation to automation to standardizing on infrastructure as code, like all the things that we've all been focusing on for over a decade to preach to others and share our opinions. But we didn't necessarily go at it with everyone knowing that this is going to save us money. This is going to save us time. And I feel like you're right that AI, I guess the negative is it's hyped. But the positive is we might be able to use that hype to actually get business to move on some of these things that we've been trying for so long. Because if I go to the team and say, Laura's new project shows, I'll look at this new talk for Laura. It shows the stats that say if we have better Confluence, if we have better in repo documentation, if we have better project planning that's linked into other things, our AIs will actually perform better for us and save us money. Maybe that's what will actually move the target. So you heard it here, folks. Yeah. Just go spin that to your leadership. Maybe you can get approved more AI tooling and more of the stuff that you actually wanted to work on. We need more documentation, but I don't know anybody that's clamoring to make more. So I'm excited that AI might help me write it better and keep it up to date better, or find the outdated stuff better. There's so many opportunities for improving it.
Yeah, I think documentation is a really good use case for AI in a way that saves time as a second order consequence, like a second order indirect effect. It's harder to estimate because the reason that documentation has never been, it's always been like a nice to have, right? It's been a vitamin, It's not a painkiller. And I think that's been the experience in general of like developer experience. It's something you do to take care of yourself because you're good. It's not like my arm is cut off and I need to bandage it. In reality, that's what developer experience is. It's that your arm is cut off because on average, developers waste 20% of their time each week because they can't find the right documentation. They're waiting for builds to finish. They're waiting for all this stuff. 20% of time. If you can imagine a roofer putting shingles on your house, throwing 1 out of every 5 shingles down to the ground, or 1 out of 5 nails did not work, that company would go out of business and no business leader would tolerate it. But because it's hidden in the knowledge work and behind developers and we can kind of brute force our way through it, we don't know the boundaries of the problem, and that makes it squishy. It makes it seem like a vitamin of, give the developers nicer documentation. They'll like that. When actually, if you were to measure and use some, measurements like we do in DX and try to identify how many times per week does a developer lose 30 minutes or more because they can't find information due to outdated or non-existent documentation, look at that number. Now that number is your arm cut off, right? That's not a vitamin anymore. There is a bit of marketing around developer experience and a lot of talking about what it is, because it's not ping pong and beer. This is like existential problem. And I know that we all know this, and that's why we have been working on DevOps and developer tooling, because we know the real business impact of it. But it has been historically really hard to tie that to dollars and cents, which is what the business needs in order to keep their wallets open. I think AI, if anything, as you said, it's overhyped or hyped the right amount. I don't know how much hype is the right amount of hype, but people sure have their wallets open, and maybe now's the time to take advantage of that.
I was just going to reiterate and repeat a little bit back to Laura that in my entire career, the 3 things on every project that get cut first, and I always like to say this in project meetings when we're all about to cut something, it's documentation, monitoring, and disaster recovery testing. Like those are or just testing. Those are the 3 things I see on every project that left on the cutting room floor when the budgets are tight or the timeline didn't get met. If AI could improve just those 3 things, documentation, monitoring, and testing. If we could just improve those 3 things, I feel like a bigger portion of that graph that you were showing, and for those that weren't seeing it, it was a line graph of all the different places that devs spend their time. And at the very bottom, code generation, like the very bottom of it was pretty sad.
Yeah.
But
so interesting. It's kind of like an outcome of this data is that if you're out there, if you're listening to the show and you're a dev or a platform engineering team, and you're in your sprint retro and you're looking at your backlog, if you scroll all the way down, there's probably a line that says improve documentation that has never made its way up, or, refactor this critical little piece of code, improves the speed of CI/CD,
increase test coverage,
or one of the monitoring ones. There's probably these user stories that have been on the backlog and the bottom. You just got to scroll all the way down. It seems like and if your organization, if you're sitting there in your sprint retro and you're going through your backlog and planning for your next sprint, and your organization is asking you to adopt AI tools to show an outcome of 30% plus productivity gains with using these tools, right? Regardless of how you're going to use the tool, you might take this opportunity to take a look at those items on your backlog and push them up into the new sprint, because you can now say that those are tied with this data. You can show that those backlog items, those forever backlog items, are valuable in actually seeing those productivity gains from these AI tools. Is that the right interpretation? Is that what you're saying, Laura?
I think that is a really good interpretation. I think where things get tricky is building the business case around them. Because it's really been difficult for developers to say, sorry, we're not going to do X so that we can work on our documentation, increase test coverage, build out different test cases, work on our CI to reduce flaky tests or make it run 15% faster. It's been really difficult because this shouldn't be extra work, right? We don't want to overload devs with extra work. We need to take something away. That's where things get really tricky, because when we have a feature that we know is going to bring in, we have it's $500,000, let's just say that. I can't hold up documentation improvements or CI/CD improvements next to $500,000 and make it as close to an apples to apples comparison. It's so difficult to do that without data, because we can't conceptualize how much money that is costing our company. And so often what we end up is like, sure, that feature might bring $500,000 of new revenue in the door, but this is going to allow you to accelerate delivery for everything else in the future by 20%. And how much is that worth in terms of salary cost avoidance and time to market realization for your future investments? We can do the math and figure that out. But that's where platform engineering teams, where software development teams, like app development teams, are having the hardest time right now, is making those arguments. And that's where DX, that's our backbone, is like drawing the boundaries around how much it's costing you to have these problems, helping you figure out how to prioritize them so that you can reduce the friction and stop wasting 20% of your time every week, because that adds up really fast. And it's just not fun. So why don't we talk more about AI stuff?
Yes. Assistive versus agentic was another thing. But Bret, go ahead.
Yep. So assisted versus agentic, what does that even mean?
What does that even mean? So I think that when we talk about AI, or like when AI is talked about in general, it's kind of like this big pool. AI is such a broad term. Even thinking about those use cases that I talked about, AI for code gen versus AI for refactoring code versus AI for running after the commit pipelines, that's already a huge variation. And then when we talk about the interaction modalities of AI, we've got, am I talking to ChatGPT in a separate window, asking it like, oh, how would you plan this feature? Like, what are the questions I'm missing? If I'm going to do a pen test on this, like, what are some edge cases that I might have missed? Versus code completion in the IDE versus agentic workflows that need human approval versus ones that are running in swarm mode with many agents doing work. AI is such a huge term. And so when we talk about the shift in the spectrum from assisted to agentic, we're talking about human in the loopness. Maybe I would call it like that. With assisted engineering, we've got chat modality, we've got autocomplete in the IDE. As we get closer to agentic, maybe we're relying more on workflows that are defined and running. You have an agent doing each of the workflow for you, but you're still saying, yes, do this, and verifying, and then saying proceed and verifying and proceeding, very much human in the loop, versus like a totally agentic workflow, which is like, I need an app that is going to analyze my Pokemon card collection, tell me which one has the highest market value, and send me a push notification every morning with the highest value card, build it and deploy it to AWS. Right. And you're not in the loop at all. That's a very big spectrum versus like pair programming with ChatGPT to giving something production access. So as an industry, if I were to imagine all the companies I'm working with and I see what they're doing and put them on a scatter plot, we're definitely more toward the assisted with a little bit of dabbling in the agentic. But I would say more like workflow is starting to be that early adopter, early majority kind of bleeding edge. I've seen some interesting examples of agentic, but nowhere near industry-wide adoption of agentic models or patterns of working right now, September 1st, 2025.
Yeah.
So I like this because Bret constantly is asking me, but Nirmal, are companies and customers actually using these agents to do like SRE tasks or operations or DevOps? Like, are they, where's the actual use cases? And
show me the monies. Yeah. Show me the AI. Show me the AI.
So I'm going to deflect Bret's question that he's constantly asking me to you, Laura. I know you just mentioned that on that scatter plot, it's definitely not the majority, but are you seeing some early signs of agentic workflows, not only for business use cases, but also for DevOps tasks like operations, SRE, CI/CD, things like that?
Yes, I would say as a short answer, yes. I think the complexity is the variable influencing how and to what extent that's being used. Looking at SWeBench, this hasn't changed since I looked at it recently, but we've got 67% of tasks resolved, and a lot of these models are hovering in like the 55%. So like the technology is also just like not there. So this is, for those of you that don't know about this leaderboard, this is like testing the model's capability to complete a task end to end and have it be correct. A coding task.
Is this one shot or is it through a workflow?
It depends on the tool. If you look at the list, each one might be like just this model or this model plus some additional tooling that turns it like Warp claims, that their agent model that's using a particular LLM like Sonnet 4 gets this percentage. So just to clarify, when Laura says 70%, what she's saying is that particular setup, like that LLM plus that tool, can achieve 70% success rate on hundreds potentially of GitHub issues that it's trying to solve for a particular software project. And that's what we've talked about before. We've actually mentioned this. I'm so glad you brought it up, because even the best models are only getting 3 out of 4 or 2 out of 3 PRs, not PRs, but correct. Yeah. And it's not fixing. And a lot of us, like, we are all very lucky. We have access to the best models, to the best tooling. We live in a Western country where we can afford all these things. I do hear on occasion feedback that a lot of the world isn't here yet. A lot of the world has to use either free models or local models or free stuff like the free ChatGPT equivalent or whatever tokens they get for free with GitHub Copilot. And they don't necessarily have the best tools unless their company buys them, because they're just so expensive unless you live in a country that is indexed to the US dollar, essentially.
So I think the technical capability isn't really there for organizations to rely on agentic workflows for things that are going to touch production. Have I seen lots of experimentation with agentic workflows for stuff used internally and doesn't necessarily hit end users? Absolutely, definitely. There's a lot of experimentation, but when we talk about it widespread, especially in the enterprise, we're still a ways away from that being reality for a lot of folks. I would say like one step back toward one step away from agentic, which is like workflows. I have seen many kind of enterprise, fast scaling, high growth organizations have their platform team responsible for creating workflows that, for example, do legacy modernization or dependency updates and make those available to other development teams, their customer developers internally as part of their platform offering. So this is not quite agentic. There's still more human in the loop. There's more human verification. But companies that are really investing in AI have done a lot of training and enablement to get all of their developers with not just an understanding of like how the tools are used, but like organizational understanding of how to apply it to their business context. They are experimenting with, agentic adjacent, we'll call it that, agentic adjacent workflows. And that's exciting and promising. I think by the end of the year, maybe in Q1 of next year, my answer will likely be very different.
Well, we'll definitely have to bring you back to give us an update on what you've seen. So
it's a moving target.
I want to share just one, kind of thinking about how AI can't make up for all of the DevX gains. I think agentic has a lot of promises, but there's still so much work to do when it comes to identifying organizational use cases for AI to help deliver software faster. This is, I'm going to publish this, I think, this week, actually. This is looking at data from over 100 companies-ish that have developer populations between 100 and 500. And I'm looking at their annualized cost savings. These companies have said this is what a full-time employee costs. This is how much our developers are using and saving from AI each week. And so this is the annualized cost savings in US dollar from using AI. Obviously, there's going to be a trend line. The more developers you have, the more you can save because math. But even if you look at some of these like 200 developer, 300 developer mark, we've got companies saving over 6 million in recovered salary cost. And like, you know, this company, not that much of a different size, is like not even breaking 1 million. It's not that these companies up here are using agentic workflows to do a bunch of stuff. It's that they have done really good training and enablement. They've found organizational use cases. They've equipped their organizations with AI instead of spraying and praying to their individuals and hoping that curiosity and grit will take it the rest of the way. There's so much room for optimization all around. Agentic workloads are incredibly interesting, and I'm very optimistic. The reality is that I just don't see them being widely adopted, especially in customer-facing environments and in the enterprise just yet. But again, my answer will probably change.
So this is interesting. Is this also normalized based on the developer salaries?
The companies that I've included in here have given us information about how much a full-time developer at their median salary point. This is adjusted. I have another version of this, which I'll publish along with this, where I pivot basically on region. And you can see like the lower bands, there's a lot of Europe down here because the salaries in Europe are just generally not as high. These are US companies, and then like Asia companies are kind of spattered across. But that seems to be like a pretty, in aggregate, like a representative trend for what we're seeing also extending to bigger companies.
I would love to see that pivot on the left-hand side, the annual cost savings per normalized developer salary or something like that. Like a little bit normalized, just so that it's easier to compare. This is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's fascinating information. So what are some of the, you kind of mentioned, I mean, these are actual, this is like real money that we're seeing, right?
Yeah. And if I had to describe this to the audio listeners, I'm looking at a graph that is all over the map. There is nothing here that is certain. There is no clear location where like, this is where everybody, like the majority of people are seeing this level of benefit. It's basically every company of like the size you said, right? 100 to 500 engineers, I think is what you said. And they're all over the map. I mean, as you might have guessed, the ones that are saving the most money are rare. There definitely seems to be more concentration on the low end of benefit, but there is no clear cluster here yet. This doesn't look like a typical sort of Gartner approach where everyone's huddled in one place. I think this is just indicative of any new technology that we don't really know how to use yet. We don't really know the patterns and practices. We just know a lot of people are trying, and you might be wasting your time. You might not.
Absolutely. That's exactly how I interpret this. And I use this to set up like, it's just look at for the audio listeners, we've got on the x-axis engineering organization size and on the y-axis annualized cost savings in USD, but only for companies from 100 to 500 engineers. So if we look at companies that have 200 to 250 engineers, we've got all the way from 5.5 million down to 800,000 for the same exact size of engineers. And so what that tells us is, I mean, maturity, we can look at how long has AI been introduced, but what it comes down to in my experience, kind of like anecdotally, and I'll put together the dashboards to prove this because I do have data to prove it as well, but it is developer experience and it is training and enablement technique. If a company makes licenses available to engineers and says, okay, go for it, encourages people even, make a Slack channel, share your good practices, that will not bring as much effectiveness as actually Nirmal borrowing like your experience-based accelerator, like Amazon's kind of method of bring a real business problem and then bring the technology together and like, let's figure out how to solve the real business problem as a team and then create a blueprint for that and spread that out. That has been incredibly useful. Booking.com, for example, they have 3,500 engineers. They have a 30% increase in merge request throughput, but they were able with that technique of the experience-based accelerator doing modernization projects and getting 70 to 80% of the way there with AI using that technique from Amazon. The median adoption for developers in an organization is a little over 50% of developers using AI on a daily or weekly basis for AI assisted engineering. Booking has 60+% using it on daily and weekly, and of those 70% are using it on a daily basis. So they've been extremely successful. They have a huge ROI. It comes from the training and enablement and treating it as an organizational tool and focusing on the workflows that AI helps to enable and not just an individual productivity tool where Nirmal can type twice as fast now.
Interesting. So this mirrors the same kind of conversations I was having with organizations almost 2 decades ago, or a little under 2 decades ago, with the adoption of DevOps practices. Organizations back then, I think Target famously had like a dojo, a DevOps dojo, where they would bring teams in with these DevOps subject matter experts and take a workload and re-architect it and train the trainer and get the developers and the platform engineers up to speed around that specific workload, migrate it, modernize it, and then put it through production and then take the next team. And so what you're saying is this is no different, right? AI adoption, developer experience with AI tooling, organization, if they want to be successful with these tools and really see some gains, they need to take the same approach of standing up some kind of outcome-oriented, what do you call it? Like a dojo, if you want. We could probably call it a dojo, like an AI dojo for adopting these tools to be successful, and not just say, oh, here is an XYZ license, report back to me in a quarter where, you know, how you've been 30% more productive, regardless of what you're doing.
The bottom line, and maybe a good bottom line to wrap our conversation up, which is if organizations want to have organization-wide impact, increase productivity across the board, they need to treat AI as an organizational tool, not as an individual productivity speed up. And the organizations that do that, that treat it, like you said, like have an AI dojo or treat it with, you know, enablement in the same way you would with any other kind of organization-wide tool, they're seeing big impact. And the ones that are just spraying and praying licenses aren't going to see that impact because there's nothing new under the sun, right? This is a tool as any other developer tool. No one would have bought Jenkins licenses or like Docker licenses and just expect like, oh, we're going to modernize our whole application. It's going to run in Docker now. Here's a license. Go figure it out. That didn't work then. It doesn't work with AI now. Even though it's sparkly and shiny and there's a lot of hype, like the fundamentals and the physics haven't changed. And I think there's a lot of level-headed leaders like both of you, Bret and Nirmal, treating this with the right amount of scrutiny and skepticism and optimism. Leaders who can do that are going to be the ones that come out ahead than the ones who are, you know, spraying and praying and falling victim to the hype, unfortunately.
So you said something about 2 or 3 weeks ago. What happened 2 or 3 weeks ago?
So this has been a core concern for so many of our customers and so many like CTOs and VPs. Because again, what decisions would you make if you knew that 60% of your developers were using AI for AI-assisted coding, but 0% of that code made it to production, versus if you had 10% of your developers using AI tools daily, weekly, and 50% of the code going to production was written by AI? Those are two wildly different scenarios, and it's important to figure out where you are. We at DX have a tool that runs on the file system layer, so it can track in any IDE, in the terminal, whatever, code completion from AI tools, as well as copy paste, and then track the human editing, and then do that on a per line basis at the commit level so that we can look at the ratio of AI code to human authored code in a given commit, and then we can track that commit all the way to production. So there's like pockets of tools that could do this before, like Windsurf had some pretty good telemetry into what was going on. But before, we just sort of had acceptance rate, which is, you know, accepted suggestions and really no insight into what happens even like before the commit, after the acceptance, and then definitely after the commit and into customer facing environment. So very excited about this. It's technically very cool. But yeah, it's an industry first.
Is this a part of
what
DX?
scares you?
Is this a part of the DX platform, or is this an open source project? What is this
Yeah,
specifically?
it's proprietary part
Okay,
of the DX platform.
Sorry, that should not have been my first reaction to that. It sounds really
No.
cool, but it does. So the scary part to me is it sounds very,
Brothery.
yeah, like, so,
Yeah.
and we could have another whole entire episode on this, but this kind of comes back to perverse incentives by leadership to use this hype for ulterior motives. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Because I think it is important for us to know how much of that AI code is out there in production. I think that's a very legitimate concern on all aspects, especially from a platform, like a platform and a DevOps team perspective. I think very crucial information. But at the same time, for monitoring copy and paste from a developer, like, oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not actually uploading the copy, right? We're not talking security concerns. We're just talking. Yeah. Because this sounds way better to me than a decade ago when I was freelancing through certain websites on the internet to random companies when I was first starting my freelancing business 15 years ago. Back then, you were billing per hour, and the tool you were using for consulting would screenshot your computer every 5 to 7 minutes randomly and send it to the client to prove you were working on their tool because you were billing per hour.
Yeah.
That's way more invasive than this. I had to put up with that 15 years ago, but anyway, this sounds a lot better.
Well, again, like the devil in the details. So change failure rate is one of the 4 key DORA metrics that organizations have been tracking for a decade. In order to get that number, we ask a question to individual developers. This is how it's done for the DORA report as well. And in Accelerate, in the last month or whatever time frame, how many of the changes you pushed to production resulted in degraded service. So we can have a data point for that individual and how many of their changes resulted in degraded service. But we don't look at them on an individual basis. We look at them in aggregate. The point is about measuring the system, not about measuring the individual. And the same is true for these AI tools. Like, we're not looking at Bret had 70% AI authored code and 30%, where Nirmal had 10% AI authored and 90% human authored. We're looking at it in aggregate to figure out what's the shape of the code that's running in production. What's the security risk? How is AI being adopted? Is it being adopted by, bearded men are using AI a lot more, different attributes and demographics. Unfortunately, I have to tell the audience out there, DX does not have the attribute of bearded men.
It's not a checkbox?
Actually, that's not true. We can do any custom attribute. So Bret, Nirmal, and I, if we were on our own team, I would definitely have that as an attribute for you both.
Gray beards. I want the gray beard checkbox.
Gray beards, yeah. Totally. But it's the same threats and the same kind of concern about Big Brother, surveillance, measuring the system versus measuring the individual. They all still exist, and even more so with AI, because the threat of my job is going to be at risk because this technology is going to replace me. I feel like we're in a pressure cooker, and there's pressure coming from all sides.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I feel like we're in a pressure cooker right now.
Yeah.
And so if the audience can feel anything, we're with you. We feel the pressure. You're probably listening to this podcast because you probably have a little bit of that pressure that you're feeling to stay up to date and be on the leading edge. Part of it's curiosity and passion around the new tech. Part of it's the obligation that we feel like our jobs are somehow maybe at risk someday. I mean, there's so much confusion and news about everything. I go up and down in emotions every day around AI. It's probably generated more frustration and emotion in me than anything in recent memory that I can think of in terms of tech. So given all that, we've talked about what people can do from here. Obviously, it's a complicated answer. I feel like what we're saying is really anything in your software lifecycle potentially could be beneficial with AI, but you need to make it a project, and you need to take it seriously, and you need to train people and do all that stuff. I feel like that's the big take. But I wanted to switch a little bit to a slightly adjacent topic that we haven't discussed yet. Context switching. One of the potential hopes I have, and I think others have for AI, is that it may actually help developers with all this context switching. And you showed a graphic earlier of the top 15 activities a developer does in a given week. Everything from meetings to staring at Jira to improving documentation to, I also get to code, right? All of those context switches, never mind the idea of switching between one code base and another. Do you have anything on, are there lessons learned from this? Is there tools we can look at? Because it's one of my top goals to improve my ability to context switch with AI. I don't have any good tools. I don't have any good methods or any good information on it. So I was hoping we could talk about that.
Yeah, I want to just take this time to highlight that focus time as a driver of developer experience is capturing exactly that, like cognitive load, context switching kind of tax that developers pay from like bopping around from different tasks, but then also having their flow interrupted. Like, I'm coding and then I have to go to a meeting. We don't get enough focus time to really get into the flow state. And so that is one of the kind of hypotheses, is that if we use AI and we can automate the toil that's interruptive, do developers actually get more focus time? And I wish I had like a more conclusive answer, because I did look at this very recently and like the answers are a bit all over the place right now, even controlling for usage and different things. We track it as a first level primary metric on this AI impact board where we can do group comparison. So if we want to compare like all AI users to non-AI users, we can look at how that impacts their focus time, because that's really important. In this case, the group that's using AI actually has a lower amount of focus time, which isn't great. But we can see how that trend evolves across like the different usage thresholds of like infrequent, monthly to weekly to daily, and how the focus time is impacted, because that is, again, like the mechanics and the physics of what good DevX and like good team habits, like focus time is still important even when we have AI. And a lot of companies that I work with do have the hypothesis that AI can automate toil, give more time for focus, and increase the innovation ratio. So this percentage of time spent on feature development, we see this kind of sample group has 4.8% higher allocation toward feature development. So that's great. Their innovation ratio, we're looking at things like quality, speed, velocity, maintainability, and kind of making sure all those things stay moving together so that we don't over-index on one metric. I use AI to preserve context. I leave little notes for myself in ChatGPT. And within my 5-hour Claude Code session, I find it so helpful to not feel the pressure to have to write a bunch of Post-its to myself. Like I can just walk away from my task and come back to it. And I've like really accelerated the time it takes to get back into things, just because I have this like pair programmer who never gets tired and is always there for me, except after 5 hours when he magically goes away.
Okay. As we're wrapping up, for our listeners, so we have individuals trying to navigate these rapid changes, that pressure cooker kind of feeling. What's some advice you would give our audience that they could use today to navigate that?
Mm-hmm. I think the first thing is sort of a mindset switch. Like average median time savings per engineer per week from using AI tools for AI-assisted engineering is a little under 4 hours. That data comes from more than 38,000 developers. When you see a headline, know that that's a headline for a reason, and like get curious about what might be going on behind it. So I think that's step one, is just to like identify what's hype, have a better idea of identifying what's hype. I think the other thing is it's really difficult to make an impact with AI if you can't measure it, if you don't know what's actually happening. And so getting instrumentation in place for measuring things like maintainability, DevX, speed, throughput, quality, these can be done lightweight with a survey. It doesn't need to be this huge, robust ETL process and data lakes everywhere. You can do so much for getting visibility into how your organization is operating now and how AI is changing it. Do that easily for very low cost, other than the time it takes to do it for you as a person. Getting that data is going to be instrumental in helping you make arguments for or against certain strategic decisions on a leadership level. I think that's another thing. And I think the maybe more tactical way is if you are feeling the pressure for leveraging AI more in your organization, look at how AI is being presented. Is it an individual productivity tool where people get a license and then they're sharing interesting things that they do? Or are you doing this AI dojo kind of scenario where you're looking at problems that teams have and problems that the organization has and finding ways that AI can solve those problems organization-wide? That's where you're going to get the most leverage. Focus on those things. If you do those three together, it's going to take some time, but this sort of gets you out of the fog a little bit. Truth be told, it doesn't actually matter if Microsoft is writing 30% of their code, because you're not Microsoft. It's really difficult to not get a bit of FOMO or not feel the pressure. especially if you're getting pressure from your exec team about, well, I saw this in the headlines. Why aren't we doing that?
Yeah.
But coming back to them with data about what our business needs and what we're doing and how I know that we need to do this and not this next, that is what is going to get you ahead and stay ahead instead of just chasing metrics, vanity metrics that you see in a LinkedIn post on a random Tuesday afternoon.
Unless it's yours.
Unless it's mine.
Unless it's your
None
post.
of my metrics are vanity metrics. They all have adequately sufficient end sizes, or I call out when they don't, when a median might be unstable. But yeah, it is really hard to differentiate that because not everyone, LinkedIn is for half of a brain and half of a thumb. And a lot of the shiny graphs get the most shareable.
And speaking of that, so thanks so much for being here. Where can people find out more about what you're doing? Where are you chatting on the internet?
I am only on LinkedIn these days.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's an easy
Formerly
place to
known
be.
as Twitter. I tried to do Blue Sky. I really did for you, Bret, and for you, Nirmal, and I just really couldn't do it.
I don't get likes there, so I'm the same way. No one sees and pays attention to my stuff, other than Nirmal and a few other people.
It's very cute. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Laura Tacho out there. And you can read about more of like my research and guides on getdx.com if you go to the research tab. I'm doing a lot of research and white papers. And I heard from Nirmal, if you Google me, you'll come up with a lot of interesting talks that I've done recently.
Yes.
I've been at the Enterprise Tech Leadership Summit in Vegas talking about Booking.com and how they scaled AI adoption. I'm going to be doing some other keynotes. I'll be at Cloud Native Austria, actually. It's a CNCF like adjacent, not affiliated anymore. But I'm very excited for that. I'll be keynoting there as well in October.
Ooh.
I'll also be at KubeCon. I'm going to be at Platform Engineering Day talking about the real adoption rates of AI tools across the industry to help dispel the hype a little bit. We'll be at Backstage Con. And I'll see both of you there.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Awesome.
That's going to be an exciting talk. We talked at the last KubeCon. We were hoping for more talks this turnaround on the actual using of AI for DevOps and platform engineering rather than the running of AI and GPUs, which is what everything has been focused on for 3 years. It'll be fun to see that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Nirmal, where can people find you?
With you, Bret. So agenticdevops.fm, our podcast that you're listening to right now. On top of that, I'm on LinkedIn, Metaverse HQ, on Instagram and Blue Sky, and then mostly on LinkedIn, Nirmal K. Mehta. You'll find me.
Yeah, we're all on
He's
LinkedIn.
one of a kind.
Yes.
I post on LinkedIn as much as anywhere else now. So yeah, it is what it is. Well, Laura, thank you so much for being here. We're going to have you back. Actually, this is a spoiler that we already are planning about maybe another episode, but we won't talk about that yet. We'll talk about it when it actually happens. I'm excited to have you on the show. We're so glad to have you back. And I love this new
Nice
focus
to be
of yours.
reunited.
Yes.
Yeah, we were on the container bandwagon for a while, but I think that this might just be your moment. And yeah, we're here for it.
You're
Yeah,
here
we're
for
here
it.
for it. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah.
All right.
See you there. Thanks, Nirmal. Thanks, Bret.